Hi, you're watching the third video in the Python tutorial series, and in this video we're going to look at variables. We're going to look at how to create variables and use variables in our Python programs. And variables are basically a way of storing data or information in our programs that we can use throughout the programs and also change the data throughout the program. So you can think of variables as like a container that stores information. And we can put this information into the program, store it there, and then later on in the program we can change the information or we could access that information and use it in some way. So variables store data of different types. It could be strings. So we could create a variable that contains a string value, some text. We could store numbers in the form of integers or floats, numbers with decimal points. And we could also store other types of values, like true or false values, known as Booleans. We're going to look at these different types of variables in this tutorial and how to create and use those variables. So to start with, when you create a variable, it's basically broken up into three parts. We give the variable a name. We use something called the assignment operator, which is the equal sign, to say that we're assigning a value to this variable. We're storing a value in this variable. And then we actually specify the value that we want to store in the variable. So, for example, we've looked at how to use the print statement to display a hello world message. So in this tutorial, we'll look at how to use the print statement to display messages that we've already stored in variables. So I'm going to create two variables here. First one is going to be called message. So I give it this variable a name, a unique name, and in this case I'm calling it message. So variables variable name can't contain spaces. It needs to be unique. Should start with a lowercase letter. And shouldn't be the name of something that already exists in the Python language. So for example, we can't call a variable print, because print is a word that's reserved in the language. It's already used for something else. Okay. So also they're case sensitive. So if I create a variable called message here that's lowercase, and I create another variable called message that maybe has an uppercase letter in it, then they would actually be two different variables. So just be aware of that. So we'll give the variable a name, then we use the assignment operator, or equals, to say that we're assigning a value, and we specify the value that we want to store in this variable. So my message is going to be hello. It's a string, so it should be inside quotes. My second variable is going to be a name. So we can store somebody's name in this program, and it's just going to be their first name. So I'm going to call this variable first name, and because I can't use spaces in my variable names, I'm going to use an underscore. But I could also do it like this, so I could just capitalize the first letter of the next word. I'll just use an underscore here, and I'll just pick a random name. I'll just go with Joe. Okay, now I could use print statements to access these variables and display the contents of these variables. So for example, I could say print, and then instead of having to write the message again, like hello, I can just refer to its name. So I can just say print message, and no need for quotes. We're just putting the name of the variable into this print statement. So if I save this program and run it, when this program runs, we'll see that output there, hello. So it's printing or displaying the contents of the variable called message, which is hello. But we can also do something called string concatenation. And concatenation is basically joining two or more things together, joining two or more strings together. So we can actually join this message to this name. We could say message, comma, first name, save, and then run that. And it'll actually join those two strings together in the print statement. So now it says hello Joe. Okay, and if we wanted to add another string to that, like concatenate or join another string that's not actually stored in a variable, we could do that as well. We could add another comma, and then we could just put in quotes what we want want to display our string. So I might just add a little exclamation mark at the end of this message. Save that, run, and there we go. We've got hello Joe. Now you'll notice that there's automatically a space there. So another thing that we can actually do instead of using a comma is use a plus and run it after saving. And notice that that space is now missing. So we can use a comma to join strings together, and it will automatically add a space between the two strings. But if we use plus, we don't have a space there. Okay, so that's basically how to store string variables, values in variables, and how to use them in print statements. So now we'll look at how to store other types of values in variables. So for example, numbers. So I'm going to create two variables here. One is just going to be number1 and one is going to be number2. So I'm going to call it num1, and my first number is going to be 10, and my second number is going to be 5. Now here you'll notice that when I said message comma first name and then plus the exclamation mark, it joined the first name and exclamation mark together and didn't add a space in there. But if I was to say print num1 plus num2, it's actually going to run that calculation. So we'll add 10 and 5 together and then print the result of that. So let's save again, run, and we should see 15 there. There we go. Okay. Now something else that we could do is just store the result of this calculation in a variable. So we could create another variable here called total equals num1 plus num2. And we can add spaces between the around the plus there. It doesn't really matter whether you have spaces there or not. It will do the same thing. And now what I'm going to do is just print the total. And we see the same output there, but rather than running this calculation and printing at the same time, we're running the calculation, storing the result, and then accessing that value here in the print state. Okay, so we've looked at how to store strings in variables. We've looked at how to store integers in variables. If we want to store floats, it's the same way. So if we made this number 10.7, it will work as well. So that's just a float value there. And so now we see the output 15.7. So we can store strings, we can store integers, we can store floats. Okay, and we've looked at how to join or concatenate strings in a message, but we can also join integer values and string values together as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to join a message to a string message to a number value. So I'm going to say print the total is, comma, and then total. Okay, so that's possible as well. We can join a string with an integer value together in a print statement. So now if I run this, we see the total is 15.7. So that's another example of joining strings, but we're joining a string with a number here, an actual float value. What I'm going to also show is another way of two other ways of assigning values to variables. So far we've just looked at how to assign values to variables individually, line by line. But there are two other ways we can do it. So let's say we wanted to create more than one variable, and let's say we'll create 3 variables in one go, and all 3 variables are going to store the same value. We can do that. So let's say we want to create 3 variables called A, B, and C, and they're all going to store the value 1. The way we can do that is we can say A equals B equals C equals, and then the value that we want to be stored in all 3 variables. And in this case, I'll just make it 1. Okay. Now, if we were to print A, print B, and print C separately, and run that, we'll notice that A, B, and C are all equal to 1. There we go. All right, and another thing we can do is assign multiple variables different values in one line as well, rather than on separate lines. So let's say we have 3 different variables that we want to create, and in this case we'll just call them D, E, F, and they're all going to store different values. So what we can do is say D, E, F equals, and then each value in order separated by commas. So if D is going to be equal to 1, we can put, well, let's actually make it 3 this time. So we'll say 3, and then E will make that 5.4, so we'll make that a float. So we've got an integer here for D, we've got a float here for E, and the last variable F is going to be a string. We'll just go cat. Okay, if I save that and print out these 3 variables, so print D, print E, and print F, we'll see that they each have different values. There we go, so 3, 5.4, and then cat. So that's another way of assigning values to variables very quickly and easily, all in one line of code. So that's it for this tutorial. Actually, one more thing that I will show is another data type. So these variables here that are storing different values, these values are of different types, known as data types. So the ones that we've looked at so far are strings. So strings are basically a sequence of characters, and characters can be letters, numbers, special characters like exclamation marks, dollar signs, spaces, different things like that. So we've looked at strings. One of the other data types is integer, or whole numbers. And another data type is float, or numbers with a decimal point. But one that we haven't looked at yet is called the Boolean. So a Boolean is a value that can be either true or false. So it's either true or false. So for example, we might run some code, and the result of running that code will be either true or false. So we might say if something has happened in our code, if we get a certain result, then it might be true, and if it doesn't happen, then it might be false. Or maybe if we were creating a game, we might have a variable called game over, which could be true when the game ends, or false while the game is running. So to do that, we would give the variables a name, just like we do with any other variable. So for example, result equals, and then the value is either true or false. And it's important in Python that when you use Boolean values, that they start with an uppercase letter. So true starts with an uppercase T, and false starts with an uppercase F, which is a little bit different to Boolean values in most other languages. Anyway, that's it for this tutorial. In the next tutorial, we're going to look at how to get input from the user, so store data that's been provided by the user as they type it in, store that information in variables and use it. And so that's what we'll look at in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.